share with you that Veronica Philander is an expert in small business governance. And she will be explaining to us today on how, as business advisors, how can we support our clients in adopting an appropriate organizational culture around the POPI compliance, and to make sure that we don't just do it because we have to tick a box, but to really understand and have it integrated in the way we run our organizations and our firms. And I'm so excited. And the exciting things that I can go on talking about her. She did do her LLB at the University of Nelson Mandela Bay University, and she's also worked in law for about 5 years. She has her own legal firm as well called Chai. So, and the amazing thing, going to LinkedIn, go read more about her, connect with her, and it's a great pleasure to introduce you to Veronique. And thank you so much for making the time. And we look forward to hearing from you. But to get us started, we're going to, as usual, start ourselves off with a poll to kind of get the feel and the temperature of where are we at as an organization, or as individuals as well, as individuals and as individuals that are taking care of our client base. So I hope you can all see, all 80 of you who are here, the poll that is running, and I see some people already started answering it. And the question is about the POPI requirements. Do you fully understand the POPI requirements? That's the main question. And some of your options is yes, I am fully informed. No, I know a bit, but not all of the requirements. No, I know very little, but about the requirements. No, I do not know about the POPI requirements, what the POPI requirements are at all. And no, I do not know what POPI is. Okay, so that's our first question. Please fill that in. And I'm seeing people are going. We're at about 47% of everyone that's responding to that. Can you see that, Varonique, how everyone is responding to that first question? So I'm sure you'll be able to answer some.
I don't think Veronique can see it. It's only me and you at the moment, but we can share the results just now.
Oh, okay. All right. And then
there are 3 questions, and you can only vote after you've answered all 3 of the questions.
Yes. And question 2 is, have most of your client implemented the POPI requirements? So now we need to think as business practitioners, our client base, have they already started implementing? Yes, they have. No, they are planning to, and no, they are not sure if it applies to their business, and no, they do not know what it is about. And then our last question, which is, have you in your own business implemented the POPI requirements? And we are saying, yes, we have. No, we are planning to. No, we are not sure if it applies to our business. And no, I do not know what it is about. And no, I do not have my own business. So those are our options. And so far, we have about 70% people that have responded. I'm looking forward to a little more if we could. There we go. At least we've hit 80%. So I think we're in good. We're doing well there. What do you think, Chris? Okay, now we can share the results. Are you going to share?
I'm not sure if you can see the results there on screen.
Yes, we can. Very interesting analysis, I have to say.
I would love to hear what Veronique makes of it.
Yes. Any insights?
Well, yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out. I know as business advisors, time is of an essence. And so it's really interesting to see that most that are in attendance would like to know more about the requirements. So that's exactly what we will be focusing on in this morning's session, really getting into the basics of POPI and what it's all about. I'm not sure if we're going to go into the third question. Have we already done that? Yeah, okay. So this is the final results. Okay. Excellent. So if we can just get my slides up, then I would love to dive into what POPI is all about, really understanding the basics of it, understanding, there we go. Thank you so much. I think we can go to the first slide. So thank you so much to Baker for that introduction. Yes, I'm Veronique Philander. I'm all the way from the beautiful, wonderful, windy Port Elizabeth, Quebeca. I don't think I'm pronouncing it properly. GQ, that's what we call it. In the Eastern Cape. I'm really proud about that. And we're all about helping small businesses understand legal and making that very easy and sort of breaking down the barriers. And so POPI is actually, pun intended, not something that just popped up quite recently. It has a background. It has, come a long way from 2013. In fact, when it first was signed into law, only certain sections were enforced. And that is because POPI had to, or at least, we had to get certain aspects of the piece of legislation in place in order for it to be fully enforced. And so in 2016, the information regulator was established, and you can think of the information regulator almost like the ombudsman, the overseers, the watchmen of really enforcing privacy rights in South Africa and making sure that this piece of legislation called POPI, the Protection of Personal Information Act, is actually being enforced. And so they were established in 2016. And then into 2018, with all pieces of legislation in South Africa, we normally have regulations that explain how it is expected to be enforced. And so in 2018 that was published, although it's not really as detailed as we would have hoped, but that was established in 2018. And then in 2020, when we were so focused on everything but law and legislation, especially, POPI came into into full commencement on the 1st of July 2020. And what that basically meant is that all of the certain sections that weren't enforced in 2013 now came into full force. And essentially, we were given 12 months to, as a grace period, to be able to become compliant with POPI. And that meant from the 1st of July 2020 to the 30th of June 2021, we had a grace period to get all of our ducks in a row and become POPI compliant. And of course, 30th of June has now passed. But that's why I say, compliance, before you thinking, oh my word, I'm late. What am I, supposed to do now? I'm not advising my clients, or I haven't applied POPI as yet. Please take a deep breath in and out. This is the reason why we're doing this webinar, for you to now better understand what these requirements are so that you can get started. So on the next slide, you will see, we will go into, really just the purpose of POPI. Let's just start there. I believe, like, if you understand the purpose, you will be able to better advise, because now you have an understanding of the topic. And so POPI really establishes the right to privacy in South Africa. And it really looks at how, you are safeguarding personal information when it is being processed. It further looks at, if we go to that next one, it further looks at how, we are processing personal information. So now it regulates the manner in which we process personal information in South Africa. It also gives us certain rights and remedies as well. And that's why, the information regulator, as I mentioned it before, it was established first when we wanted to now, get all of our ducks in a row for POPI and the infrastructure. Now we have rights and remedies, and I'll touch on that a bit later. As individuals in South Africa with personal information, we have rights and remedies, and the information regulator plays such a big role in making sure and overseeing that these rights are actually being protected. So now that we know a bit more about the purpose of POPI, it's really important to understand what POPI tries to protect. It is in the name, the protection of personal information. So what personal information really is in terms of POPI, it can be categorized into two big groups. So there's a general group, and we'll look at the general group just now. It will include like contact information, so anything from emails, telephone numbers, physical addresses, your private correspondence as well. Biometric information. So for example, if your clients might be using biometric information to clock in, clock out, DNA analysis, fingerprints, all of those types of information. Demographic information, I think we use on a daily when you're asking for someone's age or gender or race or date of birth. Opinions, that grouping is very sort of interesting to me. The opinions of a particular person or a group of persons would also be regarded as personal information in South Africa. And then of course your historic information, like your employment information, financial information, medical history, that type of information would all be grouped under the general category of personal information in South Africa. There's also another grouping, which is like your special personal information, and that you would deal with in, in a bit more, I would say you would try and get special consent for that type of information. And if we can go to the next slide, you will see what would actually fall under special personal information. So all information that deals with religion, philosophical beliefs, race, trade union membership information, political information, and so forth. Also, your criminal behavior would also fall under the special personal information grouping, as well as information that relates to children. So now that we know, what POPI tries to protect, which is personal information, okay, and it can be grouped into two categories, it's really important to know whose personal information is being protected. Now, POPI defines, that data subjects is the terminology that POPI uses. Their personal information needs to be protected. Now, a data subject can either be seen as an individual or a legal entity. And interestingly enough, POPI is probably one of the few pieces of legislation in the world that also includes legal entities amongst data, or within the definition of a data subject. And that actually means that a data subject also has personal information, also has email addresses, has biometric, well, can't really have biometric information, but has historic information specific to its business, and therefore POPI also protects legal entities. So that's quite interesting. The big question is, who must comply with POPI? Now, I've seen, especially around the time where there was really this huge buzz. What is POPI? What must I do? I've seen a lot of people ask the question, must I comply if I have a business that, only employs 2 people, or it's only myself, it's really not a big establishment? Is POPI not only relevant to, your bigger businesses? And the answer to that is, unfortunately, no. POPI is not concerned with the size of your business. It is concerned with the fact whether you are processing personal information of a data subject. And now that we've learned what personal information is all about, and that we've learned what a data subject is defined as in terms of POPI, either individual or a legal entity, it's important to understand that POPI defines responsible parties who actually process personal information of data subjects as either a private body or a public body. Now, let's look at what a private body is. A private body could either be an individual, a partnership, a legal entity, could also be a professional, all that might be trading or running a business. Those different sort of categories would all fall under private bodies. Public bodies would include basically all spheres of government. So whether it is local, provincial, or national, the different departments within the state, that would be categorized as public bodies. So if we go to the next slide, we will know what processing actually means. Now that we know that responsible parties who process personal information, they need to comply with POPI. So what does processing mean? Processing includes the entire life cycle of the personal information that you are collecting. So it includes the collection of the personal information, the recording of it, the collation of it, the storage of it, all the way to the point where you are actually destroying or destructing the actual personal information. So it's each and every part of that process. Personal information would actually, or processing of personal information would actually include all of those steps. And it's really important because it's not just the collection of the personal information that is relevant. So now that we know what POPI tries to protect, which is personal information, we know who POPI tries to protect, which is the data subjects, either individual or a legal entity. We know who must comply, responsible parties who process personal information. It's also important to note the rights that data subjects have. So take off your business advisor cap and put on your data subject cap, because we all in this room are data subjects. We all have personal information that is relevant to us, and therefore we have rights in terms of POPI that now need to, be protected. So some of these rights include that you need to be notified if your personal information is being collected for whatever reasons. You need to be notified if an illegal person or unauthorized person is actually accessing your personal information. You also now have the right to request access to the records that a responsible party, organization, legal entity might be keeping on your behalf. You also have the right to request that your personal information needs to be corrected, destroyed, deleted, whatever the case might be. You have that right now. You have the ability to be able to object. On the next slide, you'll see on reasonable grounds, if you don't want your personal information to be processed. You also have the right to object if you don't want your personal information to be processed for purposes of direct marketing. And you also now have the ability to submit a complaint with the information regulators. So remember, the information regulator, I mentioned that they are like the watchmen. They're also there to make sure and to receive complaints and to investigate those complaints and to make sure that, the requirements in terms of POPI are being enforced. And you also have the right to institute civil proceedings against whoever is not protecting your personal information as they are, expected to in terms of POPI. So those are the rights of data subjects, and it's really important to know because as you will be putting things in place, or as you will be advising your clients to put certain things in place, it is important to keep that in the back of your heads to understand, or in the back of your minds at least, to understand these are the rights that POPI tries to protect. And in everything that we do, we need to make sure that those rights come through towards the forefront in terms of our compliance. Now, if you pick up the piece of legislation called POPI, you would note that, the crux or the core of POPI really revolves around 8 conditions. And we'll quickly look at those 8 conditions and what it actually entails. So if we can go to that, this is the summary of the 8 conditions. And if we go to the next slide, I'll quickly go through the 8 conditions. And if you don't remember anything of the session, it's really important to really remember these 8 conditions. Now, condition number one is accountability. And essentially what POPI is trying to do is that all responsible parties who are processing personal information need to be accountable. They need to be accountable to actually commit to adhering to all of these 8 conditions. And what is important to understand also about the 8 conditions is that it's not just about complying with one condition and saying, yes, I'm POPI compliant. When you process personal information in South Africa, you need to apply all 8 of these conditions simultaneously to be able to be deemed as lawfully processing personal information in South Africa. And you will be held accountable for that. So the first condition is accountability. The second condition is processing a limitation. And it's exactly what the words are saying. There's a limitation on how you are able to process personal information in South Africa. You're only able to process information or personal information that you gather directly from the data subject, or if there had to be a legal duty that is requiring you to process that personal information, or if there had to be a contractual obligation. So for example, legal duty could be if you have employees, or if your client has employees, and there might be certain personal information that you need to process because you need to give that information to the, the UIF or to SARS, or whatever the case might be. That could be an example of a legal duty that is actually, obligating you to process that personal information. The third condition is a specific purpose, and exactly what the word is saying. You need to have a particular purpose for actually processing the personal information. So your client, if they're wanting to process personal information on behalf of their clients, they need to understand what the purpose would be. Gone are the days of just, completing forms that have no relevance to the actual purpose of why you actually need to submit that form. So you really need to sit down and understand what personal information you're wanting to process and for what particular purpose. And you must make sure that the data subject is aware of the reason of why you're wanting their personal information in the first place. Condition number 4 deals with further processing limitation. And what that basically means, just to make it practical, when you registered for this particular webinar, you gave certain personal information to be processed for you to be able to attend this particular webinar. However, if your personal information is going to be used, let's make an example. I have a business, I sell, I don't know, fruit and vegetable, and I'm wanting now to take all of your details and tell you about the specials that we have next week for our fruit and vegetable combos. That is completely unrelated to the original purpose of why you initially gave your personal information to start off with. So further processing limitation, condition number 4, actually tells us that we are not allowed to process personal information unless it relates directly to the original purpose of why you had initially asked for that personal information. Condition number 5 deals with information quality, and it talks directly to the information that is being processed, making sure that that information is complete, making sure that it is accurate, that it's not ambiguous, that it is clear. So that is condition number 5. Condition number 6 deals with openness. And openness really, like the word suggests, is all about making sure that the data subject whose personal information is being processed really understands what the reasons are for the processing to start off with, that you let them know that, it's not whether it's mandatory or voluntary, that the reasons in terms of why you're wanting it, and that either if you're doing it in terms of a particular law or in terms of a contract, that they are aware of that. Condition number 7 deals with security safeguards, a condition that I think is really important, especially in the time the times that we live in, that is very electronic and online, and really making sure that you have technical and sort of organizational measures in place to safeguard personal information, particularly to prevent that personal information from being either destroyed, either being accessed illegally by unauthorized persons, or it being lost. And so really mitigating against that potential risks, and making sure that the security safeguards are in place. And then condition number 8 deals with data subject participation. Now, if you've sort of taken note from the start of this conversation, you would notice that POPI really has a big emphasis on the data subject and the data subject's rights. and sort of including the data subject into the process and making them more aware of what is happening with their personal information. So data subject participation really, it speaks to that. And now the right for the data subject to have access to the records, and if they request, more information about who is actually processing the information, that they're now able to get that information from the responsible parties. Also, that they are able to request that their personal information be corrected if need be, or updated or deleted if they so wish. So those are the 8 conditions: accountability, processing limitation, specific purpose, further processing limitation, as well as information quality, openness, security safeguards, and data participation. And that is really what all of the fuss is about. We need to understand each of these requirements or principles or conditions. Those are interchangeable words. And in all of the articles about POPI that you'll go and read, you'll get to these 8 conditions. And so now that we know who has to comply, who has to be protected, what needs to be protected, as well as what are the requirements specifically, I think we can go to that next slide. As a business advisor, your client comes to you and they are very stressed out. What must they do? They are not POPI compliant. The first thing is the person who is expected in that particular either company or whatever the structure might be, that particular business, there needs to be an information officer that needs to be appointed. That information officer has duties. We won't go, for purposes of time, we won't go into details with regards to that. But what is important is that information officer will be the one person that is going to enforce POPI compliance within that business. And so the first question to ask your client is, have you identified the information officer? And has that information officer been registered with the information regulator? That's very important. And then once that has been established, it's important to ask, does that information officer know their duties? Because if they don't know their duties, they can't enforce, POPI compliance within their organization. And so it's important for them then to get the necessary training, because they'll also be the one to spearhead POPI compliance amongst the other employees within that particular organization. So that's very important. So that's the first thing you'll ask your client. The second thing that you'll ask your client is, in terms of the POPI regulations, there's actually, duties that the information officer needs to follow and needs to actually get into place, essentially to comply with POPI. And one of the key things that the Regulation 4 actually states is that a compliance framework needs to be put in place. And essentially what the compliance framework is like a roadmap. Like anything, you need to have an action plan. And so you need to make sure that your client has a compliance framework in place to sort of map out how they intend to comply with POPI. So now that we know the 8 conditions, there might be, certain basics that your client is able to put in place right now. But there might be certain things like software, for example, with security safeguards, there might be sophisticated software to keep, everything on the cloud or whatever the case might be. And so they might not be able to afford it at this stage. So in your compliance framework, you'll put your full sort of picture, all of the things that you'd like to put in place, and you'll also sort of map it out with certain milestones. And so you'll include all of that. And the question is, have they developed a compliance framework? Number 3, what is important is really to understand what personal information is this particular client processing at the moment. It doesn't help talking about, 8 conditions here, but the crux is all about the personal information, making sure and doing a full audit of the personal information that you currently have. Is it still relevant to the business activities? Many of us might have databases of personal information that you've been collecting over the years. And the question is it still relevant to the purpose of why you had processed it in the first place? Because POPI says that we are not allowed to keep personal information that is in fact no longer relevant to the particular purpose that you had collected in the first place. And so really doing sort of an audit and understanding the impact and the risks that are involved when you're processing personal information is really important. Number 4, one of the other requirements is that a POPI manual needs to be in place. And so what the POPI manual, I've noticed, on social media that a lot of the times people think that the manual is in fact, if I only have this manual in place, then I would be POPI compliant. And in fact, the manual is simply actually setting out the process of how a data subject can request in a formal process their personal information from your particular organization or from your client's organization. And so it is unfortunately not the be all and end all of POPI. It's simply just one of the components. To remember, one of the rights of a data subject is to be able to request their personal information or access to the records. And so the POPI manual makes that easier. It sets out the formal requirements of that. And then number 5, asking your clients, have they actually brought all of their policies and contracts into alignment in terms of bringing in POPI clauses, making sure that they have covered potential risks when it comes to POPI compliance, and making sure that everybody that they have dealings with, whether it is a service provider, whether it is, their employees, everybody whose information they are, collecting and processing, that their contracts also speak to that, and making sure that everybody within the organization also understands how their particular organization intends to be POPI compliant, and having POPI awareness sessions is really important. It doesn't help for only the information officer to understand POPI. It's also important that whoever is dealing with personal information, whether they're processing, forms on a daily basis, whether they're the ones that deal with personal information, whether it's from a marketing point of view, whatever the case might be, it is important to have those awareness sessions. So those are 5, easy steps to start the process and to be able to advise your clients, to be able to go forward. So yes. Just a bit of our services that you can take note of. We have a self-learning course for information officers. We also run a series called POPI Made Practical, and we really specialize in the documents, making it very simple and affordable for small businesses, because that's really our passion. So I am open to all questions at this stage. I think I'm still within the time. You are welcome to follow us on Facebook. And we've also now recently started a Facebook group, hopefully to be able to empower, the small business information officers out there with the right information. So please check out that on Facebook as well. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Oh, wow. That was amazing. There's so much amazing information that we need to absorb. And I'm so excited. There's been some thoughts and questions, and I see there's a hand raised up. But I would like to just give Mpho maybe an opportunity, because I see you've unmuted. And then from there, any of my colleagues who want to just add something, you can unmute yourself. And then I would also just leave a question with you all. Like, what has been your big takeaway from today, from that presentation? Could you kind of think about it and share it in the chat? And then I will then take note of the 2 hands that are up. I'll take care of that after my panelists have shared some thoughts. Thank you. Go ahead, Mpho.
Thank you so much, Tarek. I think for me, what was very interesting is we think we know, we have really grasped what POPI is. And from where I'm sitting, I feel like as if I had to go through the whole learning process again. And I'm grateful for this information that Veronique has shared with us. And just to sort of take back, reflect on the survey. If we're to look at the survey outcome, I think it's important that we go back to the survey outcome, because it gives us an understanding of where we are at and the gaps that we need to be addressing be it as advisors, advising our client, or, you know, also within our own space as SMME practitioner, SMME owners, because I always say we border as advisors, we border between the two. You know, you are still owning your own small micro enterprise, and yet you're also expected to really provide advice. So those three aspects, I mean, when you go back to the first survey, I think that triggers the gaps that still needs to be addressed and harnessed, or assisted in as far as the whole thing is concerned. And I've also seen that some of the colleagues have raised some questions in terms of, you know, the recycling of information. That's one of the things that I wanted to also raise. We tend to recycle information thinking that we have gathered data here. Our database can be utilized for other aspects, and I'm guilty for that. So it's, Veronique, please assist us in that so that we know exactly if a data was collected for a particular purpose, can it be recycled? And when it be recycled, what parameters are we supposed to be operating within? I think it's important because we do that, whether we like it or not. I'll leave I'll just stop there for other people to comment.
Great. I'm not sure if I'm able to answer that in the meantime.
Please do.
Okay, so that's a great question. Okay, excellent. That's a great question in terms of whether the information can be recycled. I think just when the clock struck midnight on the 30th of June, we all got an influx of different emails from different responsible parties that had sort of indicated that they are POPI compliant, that they're adhering to all of the principles. And these are basically the conditions in which they are, you know, utilizing our personal information. So they actually gave us information on, you know, what is the purpose of them, you know, utilizing our information. And I think that's really important, that when you gather the information, really make sure that all of the reasons for you collecting that information, for you to be able to process that information, is made known to your data subject. So in that first notification, or whether it is through a contract, whether it is through getting direct consent through a consent letter, it's important to make it known from the beginning. So you can't, if you saw condition number 4, further processing limitation, you're not able to process personal information if you didn't get the original consent, if that makes sense. So it's really where the critical how can we overcome this question will come in, is to make sure that first engagement with the data subject, when you're asking them for their personal information, whether it's on a form. So let's say, for example, practically it's a membership form like with IBASA, making sure that on your membership form you cover all of the reasons why you would be collecting and actually processing that personal information. So if it's for invoicing, you'll also say that's one of the reasons why we need your information. If it's for marketing, that's one of the reasons why we need your information, and we will be processing it for that purposes. If it's to contact you because we just want to find out how you are doing, you put it all in that first engagement sort of consent, whether it's through a contract, because sometimes we're engaging with our employees, or your client might have employees. You'll put that then all in that employee contract, and then if there's a policy specific to that, you'll put it all in there. So it's really in that first encounter with the data subject, making sure that they are aware of it. And you'll have to think about your business activities. As you think about POPI compliance, you need to think about it in more detail, because your business activities will inform the reasons why you will be first and foremost collecting the information, and then also why you're processing the information. So you can't now go blindly and say, I want email addresses, I want biometric information, but you don't even have a biometric machine. Do you get what I'm saying? So it needs to be specific to your business activity and all of the sort of aspects of that business activities. Yeah.
Wow, awesome. Thank you. Sisbongi, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Thobeka. My one is not a question, Veronique. but it's just a comment in general. And I would like to link the comment to the survey that was just conducted earlier on. You know, as business advisors, we have a huge responsibility in terms of supporting or helping our clients to comply. And compliance is one of the areas that small businesses are struggling with. And in so doing, they find themselves not being able to grow because they are not complying in so many areas. And I'm very happy that we are here today. We're talking about compliance, and we're talking to the relevant target group as well, because this webinar is meant for business advisors who must take the knowledge and the information that Veronique has shared and take it back to the people that we are trying to support and trying to assist. So yes, I'm quite happy that we're talking again compliance and compliance in the context of POPI. And also, when you look at the presentation, it was very, very simplified. Even I myself, I'm very, 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 very scared when it comes to compliance issues and so forth. But Veronica made it quite easy for us and to understand it better. And I'm hoping that in future, maybe we can have another session on the very same issue. Thank you.
Go ahead, Christoph. Thank you.
I was wondering, so Bongi referred to the survey or the poll results, and Paul as well. Perhaps it's worth, so we did share the screen there. I'm going to share it again. It is perhaps worth just coming back to that. So I'm not sure, Bongi, what struck you from the survey results. Paul, you also referred to it, you know, sort of, sorry, I'm just getting the screen sorted out here. That struck you from the poll results that's insightful and maybe guiding us in terms of also how business advisors could be better equipped to be supporting our clients, firstly, and secondly, because we are dealing with client information, you know, sort of. So Terence, you also in the room, you're active business advisor, you know, sort of, you collect a lot of information confidentially from clients, you know, sort of. So we better be on the right side of understanding what our requirements are as practitioners ourselves, as businesses ourselves. But I'm not sure what from the, and Veronique, you perhaps also have some insights from the poll that we had, you know, sort of what is pointing for us here, how to support ourselves better, how to support business advisors better in fulfilling those two tasks.
I think from my side is really important, you know, where the Act is quite clear is what the information officer is expected to do in terms of the compliance side of POPI. So understanding that all of the private bodies that you will be assisting, in other words, all of the businesses that you will be assisting, they need to appoint a information officer. So for purposes of this webinar, I didn't go into all of the details with regards to information officers, but essentially the information officer for a private body would essentially be the head of that private body. So the managing director, the person who's in charge, CEO, whatever terminology you might be using, automatically they would be the information officer. But a lot of the times that head might be really busy and wouldn't still have time for, you know, trying to comply with POPI. So they can actually delegate that task to somebody within the organization, normally somebody that's, you know, second in charge, a senior manager or so forth. And so POPI actually sets out, for example, the fact that you need to have a compliance framework as a business, the fact that you need to have a POPI PIA manual, that you have to have internal sessions. Those are all, you know, requirements in terms of the regulation. So to my first point of departure would be to understand who will be the information officer. If that person is equipped, making sure that they understand POPI from a basic point of view, and then looking at your documents and looking at what the requirements and the duties of information officer is. That's really, really important. If you understand that part, yeah, then you can.
So Johannes is posting a question there. He says, I worked as Deputy Information Officer for 9 years, appointed in terms of PIA, I'm not sure how you pronounce that act. So, PIA, is that the right way to say it?
Yes.
Can I register as information officer for POPI then?
POPI and PIA, certain sections of PIA is now under the watchful eye of the information regulator as well. So yes, I suppose depending on what exactly you had done as the information officer under PIA, definitely you would then have experience in terms of being able to help, you know, if he's being employed, I'm not sure, or if he has his own business, he would definitely have a better understanding. But there are quite like distinct duties that POPI actually sets out. So making sure that he understands those duties would be probably the point of departure there, in my view. So you would have experience, but you need to understand POPI in order to know, you know, what exactly POPI is requiring. But I know, like, for example, with PIA, specifically looking at the manual, POPI took it from PIA. So you would then have a better understanding of what is required of the PIA manual, POPI PIA manual, but that is only one component. So I would still say that he needs to understand what POPI requires from an information officer point of view.
Great, thank you, Veronique. Quick thing, I see, Bonnie, you had your hand up before we continue with some of the Q&A. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Veronique, for your presentation. It was very educational. As SEDA, we are dealing with a lot of clients. And when we want to invite some of those clients for our training, we rely on some instances from our network, which is our branches, training specialists, and they've got the data on those people that we're looking forward to inviting to attend our trainings. So what would be your advice in terms of how we approach that? Because that information was acquired before the introduction of the POPI Act. So what would you advise us to do in terms of getting access of that information with the intention of inviting those people that we have on our data to attend our trainings?
It's a great question. POPI is not retrospectively applicable. In other words, what had happened in the past, you know, POPI is not, you don't have to be compliant for past things. However, if you're going to utilize the data, and it seems like you are, going to want to still use the same information for future things for now when POPI is, you know, relevant and where you have to be compliant with POPI, I would say the safest thing is to make sure that your agreements and you have consents, because that ultimately that is what POPI is requiring. So maybe what SEDA should do is actually ask, maybe send out a communique to ask, you know, these data subjects whether it's still fine for you to actually, you know, contact them for trainings. That could be something very simply to do, but also to make sure if SEDA is getting, for example, information from third party, you know, partnerships, maybe like, for example, IBASA and so forth, making sure that the agreements amongst the two entities or multiple entities are quite clear when it comes to who needs to obtain the consent from the data subject. So say, for example, let's say you're getting information from IBASA, making sure that IBASA actually got the consent from their data subjects to share it with SEDA is actually very important. And I mean, you can apply that same principle to a small business. If I, for example, am sharing information with Terrence, who's a business advisor as well, and his particular business called Springboard Academy, I need to have an agreement with Terence to say, okay, this is how we are complying with POPI. Terence, are you also compliant with POPI number one, making sure that he is, because if you're sharing information, you're actually carrying the liability if something happens to that personal information now. There's now a risk involved. So making sure that everybody who has access to that information is actually POPI compliant, but also making sure that the data subject is aware that third parties are and may, get hold of that personal information because you have a relationship with them. So it's really important to understand that as well. But I'm more than happy to speak to SEDA afterwards in terms of how we can address that in more detail. So yeah, I hope that answers your question there.
Okay, thank you, Veronica. We'll communicate with you so that you can assist us going forward. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Veronique. That was a very important question, because if I'm doing a training or, mentoring a couple of informal traders and they under SEDA, so I'm getting my 10 traders, right? And I get all the information. And then I say, okay, I've done all of this because it's something that SEDA, let's say Bonnie is the guy that I'm in contact with, and then I'm like, here are my 20 informal traders that I've been doing this work with and I've been mentoring or something. So the relationship, what you're saying, is between me and those 20 that I'm very clear with. And then SEDA is the third party that then I need to ask this individual, just by the way, can I send your information to SEDA to use? Is that what you're saying?
Correct. And essentially you get that all in the beginning when you're actually gathering that information in the beginning. That's why it's so important to make sure that whatever documentation you'll be using to obtain the consent, because we need to now document these things. Otherwise, how are you going to prove if the information regulator knocks at your door and says, oh no, but we have a complaint, you've not been POPI compliant, there's been a data breach or whatever the case might be, this person's rights have been violated and they've complained against you, how are you going to prove this? And that's where written consents and things like that become relevant. So yes, you will obtain that consent from your data subject, and you will then tell your data subject, I have partners that I work with. You don't have to go into details in terms of the partners, but making sure that they understand that you might be sharing it and disclosing the information to third parties is really important, and that they're okay with that.
Great, thank you. There's a question here by Sipo asking, does POPI include nonprofits? Do NGOs also need to comply?
Yes, definitely.
Okay.
Sorry, I don't know if I'm supposed to answer you already, but definitely remember I said that POPI is not concerned with the size of your business or even the types of structures or whatnot. It's concerned with whether you are processing personal information of a data subject within South Africa. If you fit that profile, then definitely your nonprofit has to comply. So yeah, that's the short answer of it.
So there are a few interesting questions still. I know that we've got Terence in the room too, with us on item or two. But perhaps, Rebecca, shall we note those questions? Because I think we can perhaps address some of them quite quickly, So, by the way, if they are in the Q&A window captured, then we know there are questions. If they are on the text chat, we don't know that necessarily. So if you do have a question that you really want to have answered, please do so in the Q&A button, using the Q&A button first. But Veronique, there's a question about the commencement date and the postponement, to July 2021. So maybe if you can address that specifically, as well as if you can just comment on the manual, sort of Nanette is asking there about, sort of what does it look and feel? What if we talk about manual, what is that? And and then Rebecca, maybe we can move over to Terence after addressing those questions.
Correct, great.
Okay, so let's quickly deal with the commencement of POPI. As I mentioned, it came into commencement on the 1st of July, and we got that grace period up until the 30th of June. And then there was the information regulator that issued two correspondence. One was that they took away the deadline of the registrations of information officers And the reason for that was because they were having an issue, and they're still having an issue with their portal, which they utilize to actually capture the registration process of the information officers. And so initially it was manually done. And I think it was probably just the influx, because you can imagine all of the businesses, and not just businesses, but public bodies as well, now having to register the information officers. And so they quickly probably discovered we need to do this online. And they had a few bugs that I think they are probably still dealing with on the actual system. So because everybody had to be registered actually technically by the 30th of June, they took away that requirement. So it's not that the entire act is now, the requirement to be compliant with the entire act is now taken away. No. You are still expected to have all of your POPI compliance check boxes in a row. It's just that there was no deadline for the information officers per se, and they are still going to communicate to us when that portal is going to reopen. I watched the Facebook page and like their website quite attentively, and I've noted a lot of people and a lot of inquiries that I've also received of people trying to get a hold of them. Unfortunately, it seems like they haven't sorted that issue out. So that's number one in terms of the information officers. That was the one requirement that was taken away, if you want to say that. And then the other requirement was for the POPI manual to be in place, also by the 30th of June 2021. And so we got a further 6 months to actually get those POPI manuals in place. So we only need to have those in place by the 1st of January 2022. And so the reason for that is because initially the POPI, or the PIA manual at least, was under the management of the South African Human Rights Commission. That was sort of their functionality. And on the 30th, that functionality had now gone over to the information regulator. So there was a lot of still confusion, I think, around how that manual is supposed to look and whatnot. So quite recently, the information regulator had actually done a webinar as well about the manual, but the manual is actually quite straightforward. We have a template as well, but we sell that template, unfortunately, but at a very reasonable price. And so it's it really sets out the formal process of how a data subject can now request access to their personal information from your organization. And so, yeah, without taking too much time on that question or that answer, at least I hope that answers. You can also go and check out that webinar on the information regulators page. They have uploaded it to find out a bit more about that POPI manual.
Great, thank you very much. Okay, so should we go on to our little experiential opportunity and bring Terence in now? It'll be in about 10 minutes or so, I think, 10, 15. Terence?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Hi, Terence, how are you? I hope you're doing well.
I'm doing very
Yeah, so let's quickly, if we could, go through that 5 steps. So you are a business advisor, and I'm just curious to know, like, from your insights in terms of seeing whether, what would be the first steps that you actually, if your client had to come to you in terms of POPI compliance, what would be the first steps that you would like?
Let me start by saying what I thought I would be doing before this morning. I thought I'd be very clever and be able to help them through the whole process and do all the bits and pieces. I just realized clearly that that's not going to be the case ever. I am not a lawyer. I don't know those legal requirements. But what you've given us in this advisor's POPI checklist tells me I can advise my clients about things. But when it comes to the actual doing of those things, that's going to be a different issue. And I'm glad you put your contact details in, because I would be referring my clients to you for the details, because I'm clearly not qualified to do that for them. But yes, you start off appointment with an officer. I think the first question is, do you know what POPI is? And we saw that the survey, 50% of people actually don't know what it's about. Us in this room, as well as our clients, actually don't know what it's about. And so that would be the starting point.
I like that. I think that's a very good starting point, really understanding what POPI is about, because you cannot advise about something that you don't know, right? So really understanding that basics. And I do know, like, we will be making this presentation, if I'm not mistaken, to make available, but also really understanding the requirements, I think, is essential. So thank you so much, Terence, I think, from that point of view. And in terms of the compliance, that second step, compliance framework, is that something that you think your clients would be struggling with going forward, or?
Yes, I think so. I think that's probably the one point in which I could help my clients, is from your presentation and a better understanding of what it's about, and having to do that for myself, I would be probably in a better position to sit with my clients and help them create that framework, that roadmap that they need to follow, so that they know step by step where they would need to go. So that's probably the place where I'd have most impact in doing with my client.
The roadmap. Excellent. That's excellent insight. I think definitely if we all have these roadmaps, obviously easier said than done, in place to actually, understand where we are heading in terms of our compliance, and understanding that you won't have all of the check boxes, filled in the first POPI training that you're going to do. This is just a conversation like what we're having today, but really it's a culture of now how we are actually, dealing and sort of approaching personal information. Because in South Africa, we have a culture, I don't know if you've experienced this, Terence, we have a culture that, we just sort of share our personal information. We don't really think about it that much. You stand in the queue at the chemist and they ask you what's your address, can you please confirm your details? Or you stand in the queue of the banks, no banks mentioned, but in the information, and whoever is behind you can hear everything. So we really have a culture of really sharing our personal information, whether it's on social media or wherever. I think it's definitely important to have that compliance sort of roadmap, and understanding that you won't do it all overnight.
Yeah. The other thing that I think struck me again when you spoke about today was this is not about a law, it's about a way of life. And what you explained there about we give our information out and anyone can have it, it's about way of life. If you are protective of your information, then you do it in a way that's different. And if you do it for your own information, you are probably better equipped and more likely to look after others' information in the same way. So I think POPI will help us to do that from a way of life rather than just tick boxes.
Definitely. And of course, that last point there on the checklist, having all of your contracts and sort of policies in alignment. It's really important to bring everything together. It doesn't help just having the one, like having the plan, but not having the actual steps. So that's where the business advisors really play a big role in making sure and asking the right questions, right? Are you still like in line with your roadmap? And I like the fact that you actually mentioned that that's something that you think you can add most value to really making sure that, as a business owner that you might assist, that they're actually still sticking to that and putting things in place and really making sure that everything is consistent with what they had decided.
I'm not sure if you did it purposely, but you gave us a roadmap of how the POPI Act is unfolded. Now, that's the kind of roadmap that I see myself developing with clients, where there's a whole list of things and we start putting dates to it and times based on a deadline set for us, but also on our own deadlines. So there's a visual, not just a ticking off, but actual visual about the route to take, because a lot of those things are reliant on something else, like all those policies, and have you checked them all and are those also in place? Those are necessary. And then because being a way of life, it means you've got to do it often. And so anytime anything changes in whichever way, go back to your roadmap and make sure that all the steps are complied with, again, with the new information. So that picture at the beginning is something that I will copy, I think.
Go for it. Great. Thank you so much, Terence. I think you really now sort of even opened my thought process in terms of, you know, the way of life and really like shifting that sort of mindset in terms of how we can go about this. Not just thinking about the legal things, but really thinking about like the ways and the manners in which we can do it. So what is the key thing that you would take away, I think, from that checklist? The one thing that you'll definitely like sort of advocate for in terms of POPI compliance for your clients?
That's too difficult to give you one.
Yeah.
Something I believe in that comes out of what you've presented, not necessarily as a tick box, is that education changes behavior. So if we educate our clients into why and the benefit of it, then we will change behavior and people will be compliant because of the benefit to everyone rather than the law. But the one thing that sticks with me, and I keep going back to it myself, it's probably as a starting point for me, is that privacy policy, which we've got somewhere. It's just a document we put together someday because somebody said we needed it. And so that's something that I would, for me, would be really important to adjust for myself. And it might be that a lot of small businesses have the same thing. We've got some things which we created because people said we needed to, but we really didn't put any effort and thought into it. It's now time to do that.
Excellent. Thank you so much for those inputs, Terence. Rebecca?
Thank you. Thank you, Varonique. I keep saying your name wrong. It's so Christoph is laughing. I know it's not. Varonique, thank you very much on that. I know, and Terence. But what's interesting on that, there's a question, sorry, that Raina shares and asks actually about, you know, the processing in South Africa. The amazing thing now, because of COVID, we are also engaged in work with international people. How does that, what's that about, just generally speaking? But he asks, does that mean that Google and Facebook all do not have POPI compliant or are not POPI compliant since their process is outside South Africa? But even for us who probably do work with clients beyond, what does that even look like for us there? And then another one is on the right to be forgotten. Does POPI cover right to be forgotten? Well, you know what that means. I don't know what that means at all. So, and then Jabulile talks about, as a mobile baker owner, how do they get to, what's it? I just want to make sure I articulate that very well for them. How are they involved in the POPI? Like, what does that look like for them?
Okay.
Or maybe even someone who's baking. Sorry for interrupting you. So I think like I have an informal trader who bakes and people contact them or her to bake stuff, right? So suddenly she has the contact details for that. And maybe she has another business on the side and transports kids, that she uses the same list of names of the bakers that are part of her list and say, hey, I also transport kids. Can I have that? That's actually a live example.
Unfortunately, we'll have to start wrap up, Veronique, soon.
Okay.
Because we still have some news from IBASA and SEDA to share too. But I think we do have at least four minutes or so, I think.
Yes, for all those questions.
then we'll be wrapping up things for today. But it seems like Bonnie already has a plan there for you to keep informing the small business market about what it is. And I take that point of Terence, you know, the educational role that we play as advisors is an important one for us to take forward. But sorry to have to cut things short in such a way, but can we do those three questions quickly?
Okay, well, everybody that has further questions, you're welcome to contact us. I'll be more than willing to answer through email. I think I'm not too clear on the question with regards to right to be forgotten. Maybe that question can be further elaborated on. I'm not quite sure, I'll be honest. So I don't want to answer something that I'm not quite sure on. In terms of whether Google and Facebook are compliant, I know that this is being broadcast on Facebook, so I don't necessarily want to make comments with regards to their internal affairs. However, I can state that even foreign companies that are doing business in South Africa need to be POPI compliant. So that is a non-negotiable. If, for example, your company is processing or storing information, and so maybe you're using a server that is outside the borders of South Africa, that would be dealt with under cross-border transfers, you need to make your data subject aware of that as well. So in your privacy policy, or whether it is in agreements, whatever documents you would have that binds the relationship between you and your data subject, you will make them aware that that the information will be stored outside South Africa, and you need to make sure that wherever you're storing that information, that country as well has privacy laws in place that is similar to POPI. So that's just sort of to quickly deal with that particular question. So all responsible parties, let me say this again, all responsible parties that processes personal information of a data subject that's within the borders of South Africa. So individuals in South Africa, legal entities in South Africa, if you're processing their personal information, you need to be compliant with POPI. So that's very important. And then just the last question about the baker. For example, if depending on what type of personal information is being collected, I'm assuming, for example, probably telephone numbers through WhatsApp or so forth, yes, you need to be compliant, and you need to ask your data subject, is it fine if I keep your information to be able to contact you for future, maybe promotional things that I might be running, or specials that I might be running, and just getting that in writing. So text messages like on WhatsApp, those in South Africa are binding. So you could, if you can like share a form on WhatsApp and get them to say, yes, I agree, or whatever the case might be, through that could still be regarded as a binding, consent, as long as you get that explicit consent from the data subject that you're able to process the personal information. So any other questions, I'd love to deal with an email. Thank you so much for the opportunity. It was lovely to be with you this morning or / this afternoon.
Awesome.
Manjovo is alive and kicking. You can talk in fact now to explain that question around lots of data, the right to be forgotten.
All right, thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you very much, Veronica. So my question is on right to be forgotten. I think you just touched on it a bit, where you were saying, you're part of a list of people who are being called, from call centers and things like that. So sometimes as a lead, you might be a dead lead, or, you don't want anybody to speak to you anymore. But then they come back again after like a year or after 6 months or something like that, trying to revive the lead. So sometimes you request that they just don't have your information. So that's your right to be forgotten. Please forget about my information. Forget about everything and anything that you need from me, especially those who keep directories and those who keep, it all comes into this whole marketing thing in most cases. And we have had, from our company, we have had some people requesting that please don't call me anymore. Not really don't call me anymore. Just destroy everything that you have that has anything to do with my personal information. So does POPI, I see to some extent, it sort of like covers that, but then is it out there for people to literally just go out and say, yes, I've put up an advert which says, please forget about me?
If I can just quickly touch on that, thank you so much for elaborating. Remember the rights that I went through, the rights that data subjects have. So one of the rights is to request that your information be deleted from a responsible party's sort of storage or wherever they might be keeping it, and that you no longer want them to process it. So that right is very valid, and a data subject has the right to object against direct marketing. And that's why you'll notice that all of the text messages and so forth normally has an opt-out option. And if the data subject chooses that opt-out option, you need to delete the information from your systems. As simple as that. You can't still like keep it, and maybe one day they'll change their minds. You need to delete it, and that's what POPI requires you to do. So just to have sort of a blanket, don't contact me, I'm sort of a, going to hide under a rock, is not going to necessarily help. You need to explicitly tell them I'm opting out, And then if they don't do that, you do have a right and a remedy now with POPI. And that's where the information regulator is going to play such a key role in enforcement, because now data subjects are able to lodge complaints. Those complaints then have to be investigated and so forth. So I think in the future, it's going to be quite interesting to see how the information regulator is going to manage these sort of things, because currently, we're coming out of a culture where it hadn't been there before. So thank you so much for that question. I hope I touched on that. Yeah.
Wow. Awesome. I think really we do need another session, as I think Bunny had mentioned that. So it will happen for sure sometime, and us to go deeper and have like 102, after 101 in action, and say, oh, actually, this is the problem. And then we can delve more into that. Anyway, thank you so much for your time. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your insight and your experience. And what I'm excited to share now is really about our next webinar we will be having on the 16th of September. And really the topic we'll be covering is understanding the new business support and incubation standards. So I think that will be very interesting and fascinating for us all. So I look forward to you all clicking on the link we'll share so that you can register and participate and attend. And then on this note, really, I would love to give our two lovely ladies an opportunity to share something from IBASA and SEDA, Sis Bongi Msibi and Mpho Mofiko.
Thank you very much, Thobeka. I see Mpho, I don't know whether she's still around or not.
She'll come. Go on, so long.
All right. Yes, I thought I should just take up the opportunity. Yes, once more, good afternoon, or it's an afternoon, or it's still the morning, I'm not too sure. But mine is just to make an announcement, which Thobeka has already announced. But before I make an announcement, I would like to contextualize it. I want to take you back a little bit to what has happened in the sector. As we all know, that the business development sector has for years been advocating for improving quality in the delivery of services offered to small businesses. And in response to that, DSBD, which is Department of Small Business Development, SEDA, Services SETA, and SEED collaborated in undertaking a process of developing a discussion document. The process of developing the discussion document started in 2019, and it was completed early in 2020. And the purpose of the discussion paper was to stimulate the debate and create a situation where everyone would have an opportunity to participate through a common understanding. The discussion paper, like I said, was completed. And after the discussion paper was completed, there were some strategies that were identified, and they include the professionalization of the sector, regulation versus unregulated sector, education and training, as well as standardization. And these were the strategies that were identified to be used to improve the business advisory services. For today's announcement, I would like us to focus on the standardization. There were two standards that were identified by the stakeholders. The first one is ISO 27700, and it was identified as acceptable standard for delivery of service by the provider. The second standard is ISO 17024, and it was also identified as an acceptable standard to ensure individual quality by those that are rendering the service to small enterprises. So these two standards were identified by the stakeholders. And I'm sure the stakeholders are wondering as to what is happening. There were strategies that we identified, and no one is saying anything. I would like to say there's a lot that has been going on, and we as SEDA has facilitated an adoption of 2700 simply because this was an international standard and it was not adopted in South Africa. So there was a need for us to facilitate that process through SABS. And the adoption of the standard was completed and the standard was published last year, November. And we also, together with SABS, will be running or will be conducting webinars to highlight and unpack and create awareness of the standards so that the stakeholders will begin to engage and utilize the standards because these standards are for them. So the two webinars that will be conducted, the first one will be on the 16th of September, and Thobeka has already spoken about it. And, and the second one, it will be on the 23rd of September. So if you cannot make it on the first webinar, which is scheduled on the 16th of September, you still have an opportunity to attend the one that is scheduled on the 23rd of September. You can come as many as you can so that you can get an idea on how the standard is supposed to be implemented. And besides this standard, which is 2700, SEDA has also facilitated another standard, which is on the incubation side. And this standard will also be unpacked and presented during the two webinars. So that's the announcement that I wanted to make. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sis Mundi. That's exciting. We're looking forward to September. And on that note as well, oh, perfect. Sis Mpho, would you like to share something with us from IBASA?
Thank you, Thobeka, and thank you, everyone. I just want to also express my sincere gratitude to Veronique for a wonderful presentation. And I know there's a lot that still needs to be unpacked. And I'm glad all of us are in sync and in agreement that this is the first of many engagements that needs to happen, because it's evident that there's a lot that all of us, as we have been participating in the session, are still not well versed with, and we need to be clued up in order for us to comply and execute the POPI Act accordingly in the best interest of our organizations and our broader stakeholders. With that being said, I just want to sort of emphasize the fact that from where I'm sitting, in order for people to benefit from this engagement, it is so vital to be a valued and accredited member of IBASA. So please make sure that you register, you become a member of IBASA so that you can reap this and many rewards that we have in store for you on a regular basis. It is our responsibility to make sure that, you know what, you don't just have access to my face as the MD, but you have access to the opportunities that are available within the ecosystem, and you're able to grow with the broader ecosystem, you know, and make a meaningful contribution. So I just want to emphasize to those that are still scratching their heads to sort of say, please make sure you're compliant, because all the opportunities that we have lined up, you know, we direct those opportunities to certified valid members of IBASA, and I don't want anyone to miss out on this opportunity. And I also want to make sure that we strengthen the delivery of the service, because we can't do it as IBASA, and we need you as registered and accredited members of IBASA. With that, I just want to wrap up and not waste any time, and look forward to the session in September when we'll be talking about standards, and hopefully we can all be clued up in terms of what are the standards that we need to be complying with from an SABS point of view, and the business development point of view, and other aspect that will be touched on come the 16th of September. Thank you very much, Rebecca.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. Oopsie. Thank you very much, Mpho, and thank you very much to everyone for your time and your energy and your insight and your wisdom that you have shared with us. And thank you, Veronique, from you and your team. And thank you, Christophe, and everybody. And I look forward to seeing you guys all in September. Christophe, you want to say anything?
I just want to say goodbye. Thank you very much, Veronique. So insightful. We've shared your email address. I hope people are going to connect with you for the details that they need to implement and help their clients to be compliant. And that culture shift that we spoke about, not only ticking the boxes, but making sure we look after information of others, as Terence reminded us, in the same way that we would look after our own information. So with that said, bye-bye, everyone. See you next month.